Welcome to CityWorks, a co-production of the City University of New York School of Labor and Urban Studies and CUNY TV. I'm Laura Flanders. Each month, CityWorks explores the challenges and lived experiences of working people on the job, at home, and in our communities. Today, part one of a two-part special edition of CityWorks, in which we take our cameras inside the international conference Labor and the Crisis of Democracy, Working Class Politics in an Age of Authoritarianism, which was held at the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies right here in New York City. The two-day conference dissected labor's role in defending and advancing democracy and key labor challenges in immigration, labor education, and public sector work. I spoke with several conference participants backstage, and those interviews are coming up. Can America's labor unions and allies stand as one against what labor scholars and historians are calling a sweeping authoritarian agenda coming out of the White House? Participants in this labor conference spoke of the urgent need for unprecedented multi-front resistance in the streets, the workplace, the media, and the courts. Rebecca "Becky" Pringle, the pull-no-punches president of the National Education Association, the nation's largest labor union, delivered the conference's keynote speech on the threats that teachers and staff, as well as students in the nation's public schools, are facing, and what unions must do to defend and expand their rights. We'll hear some of that address now. President Pringle was introduced by Stephanie Luce, professor of labor at the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies.
We're here today to talk about labor and democracy. And of course, this country has never had a real democracy. It was founded in violence, it was founded in exclusion, but many of us fought hard to win rights, to win the end of Jim Crow, to win the right to unionize, to win the right to vote. And the more we fought, the more we won, but the other side has been fighting back. And they're trying to take back from us everything that we won. Now, unions historically have played a positive role, not in all cases, but in many cases around the world, in defending and expanding democracy, whether it's winning the right to vote, or the rights to engage in workplace organizing, or to overthrowing authoritarian regimes in South Africa, in Korea, and Brazil, and Indonesia. And we have a lot to learn from what unions have done and working class organizations have done around the world. How are we going to rebuild this movement in a way that fights the authoritarian threats, but also advances a strong multiracial working class agenda? And so thank you so much for joining us, and I turn it over to President Pringle.
Let us rise up with a greater readiness. Let us stand with a greater determination. And let us move on in these challenging yet powerful days to take this opportunity to, as Stephanie said, make America a better nation. A better nation. Dr. King's words are instructive in all the ways we must examine our unique role as labor unions, and especially for us as an education labor union, as we mount and lead the fight to slow, but ultimately to stop this country's march toward authoritarianism. This is what we're facing in education. They are banning books, of course, you know that, but banning the honest, inclusive education that we know our students need. We are witnessing a deliberate campaign to divide and distract, to blame immigrants and educators and federal workers, Black, brown, indigenous, LGBTQ plus people, especially our trans youth and educators, for systemic issues that are baked into this country's soil. So, you might ask yourself, why? Why are Donald Trump and his cronies attacking public education? Why? Well, you and I know why. Because they know that public education is where democracy actually takes root. and is allowed, if it can, to grow and flourish. Because critical thinking and collaborative problem solving and civic understanding are all threats to an authoritarian rule. They know that if they can control what we know, they can control what we believe and what we do. They're also doubling down on their attacks on working people and the unions that represent them. In March, Trump signed an executive order effectively shuttering the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service. That's the department agency that provides expert mediation to help unions and their management counterparts, both in the private and public sectors, to reach agreements through collective bargaining. And he signed another order to end collective bargaining for 50,000 airport screeners. Is that making us safer? Is it? No. That order was followed by one that eliminated union contracts and prohibited bargaining for more than 1 million federal employees. In addition to stripping collective bargaining protections, they're defunding the National Labor Relations Board, pushing legislation that undermines unions that represent public employees, and empowering anti-union, anti-worker governors and state legislatures to ban payroll deductions for union dues. They know that if they weaken our unions, they can weaken our democracy. But let me tell you something. We're fighting back. We're fighting back. We are fighting back. You've seen the attorneys generals, including this state of New York. How badass is she? Just saying. Civil rights organizations and unions have filed hundreds of suits, and we're one of them. The NEA, alongside the NAACP, filed suit challenging the administration's ongoing efforts to harm our kids through the dismantling of the Department of Education. And we didn't stop there. NEA, with the support of the ACLU, filed another lawsuit challenging the director of the WWE czar, Linda McMahon, and their End DEI portal. Now, if you don't know about this, it was a portal they set up to report educators for teaching about diversity, equity, and inclusion, to turn them in. All of that, combined with threatening federal funding cuts to education institutions engaging in any diversity, equity, inclusion in any aspect of their work. We are using our collective power and resources to litigate and to win. But I need to tell you, litigation is just one tool. We know to effectively fight this administration's multi-pronged attack, we have to have a multi-pronged strategy. And that strategy has to be to communicate, and it has to be to organize, and it has to be to mobilize, and it has to be to legislate, and you better believe it has to be to elect. June Jordan, an Jamaican-American writer who spent her life using her voice to create a vision of liberation, captures the essence of activism in her poem. Don't turn away from your professional responsibility and moral obligation to make sure that every student is seen and valued for the beautiful human they are. Don't turn away from your commitment to racial and social justice. Don't turn away. You can't turn away from fighting to make real the poetry in our U.S. Constitution. We the people, all of us deserve that right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of justice. We can't turn away because our babies, I need you to hear me, our babies are watching. They are watching. And they are depending on us to be worthy of them. Brothers and sisters, don't turn away. Stand in your power, and we will win. Thank you so very much for all you do every day for our students, for workers in this country, for our communities, for our values, for our democracy. Thank you.
I've noticed that you don't use the acronym DEI. Why?
As this Trump-Musk administration tries to demonize what are the core values of our country and diminish it to letters, DEI or DIA, I've just been saying to folks, say the words. Say the words. Diversity. That is the strength and the uniqueness of the United States of America. Say the words. Equity is just a way to make sure that every student gets what they need when they need it. Inclusion is part of the fabric of this nation so that we can see each other and we can see ourselves. That's how we build a just society. And access. That means that every one of our students, everyone, whether they have disabilities or whether they are in a geographic location, a rural area, they have the access to the same tools and resources and educators and opportunities that everyone should have access to. Because we actually believe we, the people, all of us, deserve that right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
That was Becky Pringle, president of the National Education Association, speaking at a recent conference at the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies. The two-day conference, called Labor and the Crisis of Democracy, featured presentations and discussions by labor scholars and labor leaders, as well as organizers, exploring the threats and challenges that working people and organized labor are up against while Donald Trump sits in the White House. Next, we hear from two university scholars, Robert Casanello, Associate Professor of History at the University of Central Florida and Vice President of United Faculty of Florida Union, also Sherman Henry, Director of the Labor Institute for Advancing Black Strategists at Clark Atlanta University. In their respective panels, they spotlighted the challenges of organizing in the South, where union density is in the single digits. Professor Casanello is the co-author of From Right to Work to No Right to Exist, Florida Public Sector Unions in an Age of Authoritarianism. Professor Henry looks at black leadership and the struggle for workers' rights in Georgia.
But I do see students, and students are engaged. I mean, especially when it's around questions of academic freedom, because, and this is something I talk about with a lot of students, and I can kind of get them agitated by entering a dialogue about this. But, the attacks on academic freedom towards us are really about them more than it is about us, right? Because lawmakers believe that students are just these empty receptacles, and that they're really not that smart and they can be indoctrinated and things like this. And so when I talk to students and young people, I mention this. I go, what do you think about this? What do you think about the idea that we can't, teach you these concepts, without feeling a sense of intimidation by our, by our supervisors? And they get, when they start thinking about that, they really heated up about that. And I'll tell you one story. I still am, a plaintiff on one of the Stop Woke Acts, right, with DeSantis. And so this student wandered into my office. She was a young woman who was on the Student Government Association. And she just wandered in my office and she says, "You Dr. Castanello?" And I said, "Yeah, what can I do for you?" She goes, "No, I just wanted to see who you were." And I was kind of taken back by it. I go, "Oh, why is this?" She's like, "I read about you in the news, and I read that you have a lawsuit against DeSantis and Stop Woke, and I really appreciate that. And I want to know, what can I do?" And I had the conversation that I just said with her about how does it make you feel? What does it say about you and this kind of stuff? And she's like, "Well, what can I do?" And I go, "Well, you're on student government, right?" And she's like, "Yeah." I go, "Well, have you thought about passing a resolution, right?" And she goes, "No, I haven't, but let me bring it back to my colleagues," or whatever. And I didn't hear from her again for like 8 or 9 months. And then she reached out to me and she said, "What are you doing next Thursday at like 6 p.m.? I go, "Nothing." Why? She's like, "Can you come to student government?" And I went to student government, and they unanimously passed a resolution condemning DeSantis, condemning Stop Woke, and taking upon themselves saying, "We are not morons. We are not idiots. We are at the center of our education, and we reject the idea that you lawmakers can tell us what we can learn." I mean, this was all in the resolution, and it was, I think my proudest moment at UCF to see that. And like I said, I hadn't heard from the student. I just said that, comment, and I didn't realize I was planting a seed. But these students really kind of took it upon themselves, and the news covered it and things like this. So, I mean, there are ways to kind of get young people involved in these things if we have those conversations.
I think the gap is that, one, we always talk about the egregious working conditions of black folks. And we also know that union density is about 3% in the average southern state. And so if folks up north don't think the least of us down south has impact with you, then just look at what's happening now, right? So we had to have a conversation about what has to happen differently in the House of Labor, talk to these national unions and say, look, we have to reinvest in the South, because if we continue to lose southern states, then you're going to lose the country. And guess what? It's 2025, we've lost the country. Now, there still remains hope, but that's the reason why we started to say, okay, we have to create a new pipeline for black workers, and we have to start looking at educational systems, which is why they're attacking it. And there was a lot of conversation this week about those themes. And so we have to transform HBCUs because they have a stake in the game. And once we now start to empower those workers, empower those students, then we think the House of Labor would then start to understand what it's like to be in solidarity. So when you look at what's happening now in Florida, the dismantling of a constitutional right to organize, but they have a right to now strip you of those benefits through the legislative session. And so that's the reason why we kind of, in 2017, started to say, how do we reimagine this out? How do we now go to folks who have resources and invested interests, both in the South and just the country? And once we know folks realize the first time is when Georgia turned blue, and I would say to folks, Georgia's not blue. We just beat them. And the second time is we know what happened. So that's part of the reason why we have to invest in the South and interconnect those who up north and other places who understand unionisms, because part of our research is not just with the workers but with the students. They don't know enough about unions because 95% of their parents and things of that nature aren't under a union contract.
I think that law was really, sort of an organizing moment for the right wing in this country. And it wasn't unusual in that there were other states like Kentucky and Tennessee who flirted with this idea of prohibiting the teaching of critical race theory and race in America and things like this. What was different about the Florida law, which is really interesting, is that the Florida law made it illegal to teach that one race was morally superior to another race. And if you think about that, that's in the language of the law, morally superior. So in theory, I could go into the classroom and teach that one race is intellectually superior to another race, but I couldn't teach that they were morally superior. And I think what is in the kernel of that is really what is at the anxiety in the right wing in this country, and that they really are trying to attack Black history and the teaching of African American history in ways that are honest and comprehensive.
Let's move to what people can actually do, because I'm feeling sort of simultaneously more frightened and anxious than I felt in a long time, but also fairly inspired by the number of folks who were showing up in protests. You both work with the leaders of tomorrow. What are you seeing in terms of leadership bubbling up today?
They're starting to reimagine leadership development and how we talk about the political season that we're in from a practical perspective. And we're not shying away from talking about race and political partisanship as relates to workers voting against their interests. So the response is we have to educate people and educate them in a truthful way. Yes.
Progress doesn't just happen.
It's correct. It's correct.
So we can't just sit back and hope it happens.
You have to do something. You have to do something. So I'm guardedly optimistic just because of this conversation, this conference, and seeing where other folks are now starting to say, hey, wait, something's not right about this. So they're starting to question this moment and starting to question the policies and the actions of their legislators. So I think guardedly optimistic is where I stand on this spectrum of fear or panic.
Sherman Henry and Robert Casanello. I caught up with them at the labor conference held this May at the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies in New York City. The conference, featuring academics, organizers, and labor leaders, also included a pop-up art exhibition featuring posters and other graphics inspired by and celebrating democratic movements and labor actions. It was curated by artist Annabelle Heckler with a coalition of other artist activists, and we got to speak with Annabelle with Medgar Evers professor Mudiwa Pettus. Here's a look at that exhibition.
We drew our inspiration from Ella Baker's quote, "Give light and people will find the way." And we think that at this moment especially, visual arts and culture are an essential part of social movements. It's labor drawings, posters, art and graphics from movements celebrating labor history, people's art and popular liberation. We are a bunch of different collectives represented here. So, and again, as I said, our title, "Give Light," comes from Ella Baker's quote, "Give light and people will find a way."
Ella Baker was very much against, pushing back against thinking of charisma and charismatic leadership as the singular model for how to lead people. So empowering everyday, organic, grounded movements to actually think about what does it mean to actually mobilize everyone in the community and not just think that there are these exceptional rhetorical leaders. So I think this idea that art for oneself and art for one's community members is super important. I think Ella Baker is a model of what it means to not only think about that from our individual standpoint, but also to empower and educate others to feel entitled to express themselves in ways that are not charismatic and in a spectacle manner.
These are expressions of like posters that connect to labor history and sort of interconnected movements from South Africa to Indonesia to Australia to Brooklyn to Queens and the Bronx and beyond that sort of imagine our connections to each other. It's also, our art is really dangerous. It allows us to imagine freedoms and to imagine connections to each other that we might not otherwise. So it's not as widely publicly funded in this moment and context. But I do think we see a beautiful outpouring of art today for, if you look at sort of people's posters in solidarity with Palestine that have proliferated in the last 2 years. I think there's new ways of creating and new ways of sharing with each other that are really powerful today.
That's it for CityWorks today. We'll be back next month with part 2 of our special edition on this year's International Labour Conference at CUNY SLU. If you have comments or questions, write to us at cityworks@slu.cuny.edu. And be sure to download the CUNY TV app, where you can watch this show and all of CUNY TV's programming. For CityWorks, I'm Laura Flanders. Thanks for watching.